Hello, trumpet players. Let's have a short discussion about whether or not you should go pro. You know, I've been teaching lessons since 1980, and for all this time, trumpet players have always asked me, do you think I should go pro? Do you think I should major in music and become a professional trumpet player? And I can understand why they would want to do that, right? Because, you know, we are told that we should choose to do for a living what we enjoy doing most, right? And if you've had a great band experience, it's kind of hard to think that there's anything else in life that could ever be like that, right? Up to this point, right? You're a high school student and you're thinking maybe you want to major in music. Maybe you want to go pro. And then there are some other students. You know, I've had adult students that asked me after 2 or 3 years. This was the first time this happened was in the early 90s. I've been teaching all kinds of students this whole time, right? Pros, I've been teaching beginners, I've been teaching beginner adults, I've been teaching intermediate adults. Whatever kind of trumpet student you can think of, I've taught it, right? And so I had one guy in the 90s that had been taking lessons for about 3 years, and he says, "Do you think I should go pro?" I said, "Well, I don't know. What do you do for a living now?" And I forget what it was, but something where he was making a lot of money, and I said, anyway, getting ahead of myself here. We're going to talk about that now. Um, you know, the biggest thing, the biggest mistake that people make when they think about going pro is that they don't do the math. So we're going to do the math. I live in Houston, Texas. So in Houston, Texas, I looked it up. The average salary is $75,000 a year. Okay. Now, what I tell my students is, being somebody that lives in Houston, your parents probably make between $35,000 and $90,000 a year. But we're going to use the average salary for this video, right? Um, but you adjust these numbers according to your lifestyle. Now, why would we need to know what your parents make? Now, in the lesson, I don't ask them what their parents make. Okay, I ask them to think about what their parents make. If they don't know what their parents make, invite them to ask so that they know. And the reason we want to know that is because most people don't want to go backwards in lifestyle. So maybe your parents only make a little bit of money, right? Then the idea of becoming a pro is different for you. Okay, so let's look at somebody who's making $75,000 a year. That their parents are making 75 a year. Let's see. 75,000 divided by 52 is $1,442 per week. If you want to live at the same life standard that your parents live, you would have to make $1,442 per week. Now, let's look at how many jobs you expect to play per week, right? I can tell you what's average is between 3 and 5 jobs per week. Now, let's go with 5, but you know, the thing is this is seasonal. Some weeks you don't work at all. And the most number of gigs I've ever had in a week is 12. And I had a week this past December that I had 12 again. Was it 12 or 11? I remember celebrating because I was so close to my highest. In fact, for a minute there, I thought I was going to be able to top that and get 13 gigs in 1 week. But that's the highest, okay? That's the highest I've ever had. And that's a whole different story. I can tell you that story later if someone asks, but there's a reason why I don't do that anymore. But yeah, let's look at this. Look at these numbers here. If you do 5 gigs, and that's a lot, really. If you do 5 gigs a week, that's 288 jobs per gig. $288 per gig. Now, that sounds kind of doable, right? Because the top paying gigs in town between 300 and 400, sometimes maybe a little bit more than that. Okay, we're talking Houston, right? Here's the problem: is those top paying gigs don't happen every day of the week. So now we're adding another element to this. Not only is it seasonal, and you're not going to get that kind of money every week of the month, but it's also contingent on what day of the week you're doing. So like a gig on Thursday night is not going to pay, not typically, $300. And by the way, the 300 and 400, that's right now here in Houston, that's if you're really good. I shouldn't say really good. I mean, sometimes bad players get those gigs. Really good at the business, I guess, is what I'm saying. You've connected with a band that's really doing well, and they're paying you that kind of money. But I can guarantee you there's not a single band in Houston that's paying that kind of money 5 nights a week. Not a single band. Not a single band. Okay? What outside of the orchestra? For that matter, I don't even think the ballet and those guys, I don't think they're making that kind of money. Okay? So, what if that brings us to another question. Maybe you don't need to make $75,000 a year. Maybe you're willing to live closer to the poverty line, right? So let me see. I have written here somewhere. Where's the poverty line? Oh, here. No, let's not get ahead of ourselves. There are gigs so a lot of times when we're playing, the gigs will be lower because of the time or whatever. And then there's places, that's what I was going to say, where you live makes a difference. Okay? $300, $400 gigs aren't going to happen in a small town. In fact, there's a lot of major cities you're not going to make that kind of money. When I lived in El Paso, the gigs paid $50. That's one of the reasons why I left El Paso. Let that sink in. The gigs paid $50. How many gigs do you have to pay? How many $50 gigs do you have to play to get $1,442 for the week? You have to play 29 gigs. That's more than 4 gigs per day, every day of the week. Not going to happen. Not going to happen. Okay, even if it did happen, it wasn't going to happen every day of the week all year. It's not going to happen all year. Okay, so now we're talking about the poverty thing. Let's say that you don't want to make that much money, that you're okay with poverty. Poverty is, for Texas, different states have different poverty lines, right? In the state of Texas, the poverty line is $25,750. That's $495 a week. Now it's starting to sound a little bit more doable, right? That's, if you're doing $50 gigs, that's 10 gigs. Now, 10 gigs at $50 is still kind of hard to come by. You know, that's in fact, that's a lot more work than a full-time job, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, that's right. Because, you know, if you include travel to and from and all that stuff, right? So, but still, um, let's say for example, you you are in a town like Houston, and you don't mind being a starving artist, and uh, you know, you don't mind that living standard. You're just going to do as many gigs as you can. And if it's close to the poverty line, well, that's okay, right? Now it's starting to sound more doable. No, it's not actually, because here's the thing. You haven't actually figured out what it costs to do this business, right? We haven't talked about that yet. So all those examples that didn't work, it's even worse than you thought. So even now that you're saying, okay, well, poverty is okay with me. I don't mind living in poverty if I can do this trumpet thing that I love so much. Right? Okay. Um, you know that, and if you don't think this way, you better start thinking this way, because it's this math that we're going to talk about is life. You don't get to somehow swim around this or weasel out of it, right? I'm just going to use one example, but there are other examples. Just the cost of getting to the gig, if you just consider that. Now, the IRS this year, for this coming year, the IRS allows 58 cents per mile, okay? 58 cents per mile. Now, you might be able to travel more efficiently than just 58 cents per mile, but it won't be that much. Just the fuel alone, upkeep on the car, insurance for the car, these things, you have to have those things or you can't get to the gig. All right, so that's the cost of doing the gig. Now, if I, for example, I live on the southeast side of Houston, if I take a gig on the opposite side of Houston, there's a city called The Woodlands. If I take a gig up there for $100, which is not uncommon. I mean, the gigs are not uncommon. I don't take any gig for $100 anymore, except for church gigs. Okay, I do make an exception for church gigs because to me, I don't consider that a gig. Okay, but let's not go there. All right. If I go to the Woodlands for $100, which I won't, but let's hypothetically say I will. Going according to what the IRS allows, my income, so it's 100 miles round trip from here to the Woodlands. At 58 cents a mile, we're talking about $58 to get there. Let that sink in. So what I make net on the gig is actually less than $40. A $100 gig ends up paying less than $40. Now, because we're not just talking about fuel, right? There's other stuff that we have to do, things that costs that we must pay in order to do that $100 gig. All right? So even at this low level of being okay with poverty, it's a very gloomy picture. You know, most people, the only way they can pull this off is to marry somebody that's making a lot of money. Okay? That's the only way to pull this off. Now, there is an old joke. There's an old joke. Says so and so is proof that you can make a small fortune in music. I'll never forget the first time someone told me this. And I perked up. I'm like, well, because we want to hear, how did this guy do this? So you ask the guy. I asked him. I said, wow, how did he do that? And he says, he started with a big one, right? The only way you can make a small fortune in music is to start with a big one. Right? Okay, so people have known this all this time. Now, there is another alternative besides marrying someone who has a really good income or starting with a, a big fortune first. There is another alternative, and most people that you see today, this is how they do it, and that is to get a job. And if you want that job to be a music job, then you become a teacher or you become someone in the music industry, working at a music store, maybe becoming a audio engineer, which by the way is actually more competitive now from what I found out recently, more competitive than trying to be a player. That really flipped around. It used to be a good gig, easy to get. Um, So now I want to talk about one more thing before we drop this subject. There is the issue of the inverted lifestyle. And this is something that a lot of people don't take into consideration either. Okay? Whenever everybody else is working, you're free. Whenever you're working, they're free. So if you want to live a normal life, it's not going to happen. And there's perks to this, of course, right? So when I go to a restaurant, almost normally, always, when I go to a restaurant, the place is not packed. In fact, there's been many times in my life when I go to a restaurant and we're the only people there. Same thing with grocery shopping. It's nice to not be at a grocery store where you have to wait in line and you get all the first pick on everything. There are perks. But the flip side of that is that you're never available to do stuff with normal people when you want to, okay? Or you could not work. See, that's the thing. You could choose to not work so that you could do normal stuff with normal people. You could do that. Here, don't expect them to ever understand what you've sacrificed to do that. The example I've used in the blog is, let's say you have a brother and you're gonna go and do your brother's, be at your brother's wedding, which you should do, by the way. You're not going to get paid that weekend. 1/4 of your month's income gone. 1/4 of your month's income gone. So if you let's say you're making $4,000 a month, because you went to your brother's wedding, now you're making 3 for that month. Okay? Now your brother's not going to understand. They won't appreciate that. Believe me. Nobody gets it. They always think that we live some kind of and I don't mean my family, right? I'm talking about people in general. My family too, but just people in general. Um, People in general think that you live some cushy life. And no matter what you do to explain it to them, that you're actually to be there where they can call you cushy, no matter what you do to explain it to them, they won't get it. They can't possibly get it. They can't possibly understand. Okay? The only way they can possibly understand is if they are musicians too, or maybe they are um self-employed or something, because that's basically what we are, is self-employed. So that's another big thing. When I look back at my career, there's things that I wish I could have done. I wish I could have taken my son to scouts, but that just wasn't something that was possible. Things like that, you know, moments, you know, moments that important family moments that you just can't be a part of because of to me to do that would mean you're not making money that week. All right. Now, I'm blessed. I've made this work for me. Um, I teach lessons, I publish, I do gigs. So I've managed to make a business out of this. Now, when people ask me, should I be a pro? I don't tell them outright no. The first thing I do is what we just did now, go through the math. Look at the math. Should you be pro? Well, look at the math. Can you do this? Are you okay with living at the poverty line? And if you're not okay with living at the poverty line, how are you going to come up with gigs that pay more than what other people are making? Okay? And if that's not what you think is going to happen, then you have to have some other source of income and play gigs on the side, right? So for me, that's sort of what I've done, except that everything that I do is still freelance. Okay? I don't have a day job. But there's not that there's anything wrong with a day job. This is just how things have worked out for me. So when people ask me, should I become pro? Should I go pro? My answer is, if you can do the business is actually more important. If you want to go pro, the business is actually more important than whether or not you can play the instrument. Because whether you can play the instrument or not, that's something that you can get better at. You can grow. You can improve. The business part of it, um, that's got to be there from the beginning. Or you're not going to, even Clifford Brown. I was reading a book about Clifford Brown, and there was a quote in the book where he said, there's a lot of great jazz trumpet players out there. I'm paraphrasing. A lot of great jazz trumpet players out there. But what happens to them is largely financial. In other words, if you can't get a gig where you're making money, then you have to get a job. And if you're getting a job, then your your music skills begin to suffer. And when I say I'm blessed, this is one of the ways that I'm blessed, is the stuff that I do to supplement my gig income is right here in the same room where I practice, right? All the stuff I do is right here in this one location. All right. Anyway, that's something to think about. If you're thinking about becoming a professional player, think about this. This is very important stuff. All right. Very good. God bless you guys. Thanks for hanging out with me again. And we'll see you on the next video. Bye.